Our speakers today are John Biersack and Dezeree Hodish. John is working on his PhD in geography, as his MA in Russian and East European Eurasian Studies. Dezeree originally comes from the University of Pittsburgh, but is working on her PhD in history. Aside from which they both work as John works in the Hall Center, facilitating research, and Dezeree in humanities and Western Civ, teaching assistantship. So they had the distinction of being in Ukraine at a time when the Euro Cup was going on, although in different locations, right? You were in Donetsk, and John, you were in Lviv. And so I think that's part of the focus of their talk today.
Well, thanks, Bart, and thanks again to Norman Saul for giving us this spot. As Bart said, we were there in the 2011-12 academic year, and the specter of Euro 2012 haunted us daily throughout our time in Ukraine. And our title of our presentation comes from a Party of Regions propaganda poster that I saw in Odessa after the Euros, basically saying that look at all the great achievements from the Euro that were made now that they're over with. They sort of have this symbolism of stadiums and trains, which we'll talk about. And to start off, we were going to show a quick video that the U.S. Embassy made in April of 2012, and to sort of set the stage for this.
Your kicks when you train for UEFA Euro 2012? Here are a few tips to make sure you stay on the ball. Ukraine has a rich heritage, vibrant culture, and warm, hospitable people. Euro 2012, accommodations will be expensive and in short supply. So make sure you have confirmed reservations before you come. Otherwise, you'll hear,
Пробачте, будь ласка, але сьогодні ми вам не можемо допомогти, тому що у нас немає вільних. Sorry, no rooms. Немає.
Once you arrive in Ukraine, you'll have to know how to get around. Games will be scattered in different cities throughout the country. Even with newly expanded service, intercity trains will be extremely crowded and will most likely sell out. So make sure you get your tickets in advance if possible. Driving in Ukraine is different than driving in the States. Driving rules and regulations aren't always followed. Driving and parking on sidewalks is common in Ukraine. Road conditions outside of cities are poor, and there are few services. When walking, crossing the street isn't as easy as you may think. Even walking on the sidewalk can be a challenge. Handicaps and medical services are not to the same standards as in America, and U.S. insurance is not accepted in Ukraine. So if you're sick or have a hard time getting around, it's best not to come to Ukraine. Medical attention while in Ukraine. Most hospitals and clinics will require you to pay cash. Medical evacuation is the best way to get Western quality medical care, but can cost thousands of dollars. Consider buying medevac insurance before coming to Ukraine. And just getting cash an issue if you're not careful. Ukraine's high rate of ATM fraud means that you should only use cash machines from reputable banks and avoid using machines that are on the street and not inside the bank itself. Euro 2012 in Ukraine. If you want to experience it, use your head.
So that video kind of sets the stage. The U.S. Embassy, very diplomatically, as we read, not too carefully between the lines, sort of was discouraging people from coming to the Euro Cup. You know, they only said positively at the beginning that Ukraine has proud heritage, rich culture, and warm, friendly people. And then after that, it goes through various lists of problems that could crop up in visiting Ukraine. And so this sort of sets the tone where the media coverage for the Euro made things look pretty bleak. And there was lots of critical press coverage. And the purpose of our Brownbag is to provide sort of a selective overview of some of the most common and controversial issues according to Ukrainian, Russian, and English language presses, and evaluate whether or not these articles were exaggerated or truthful. And we will also argue that the Euro provided some benefits for Ukrainian citizens, such as limited infrastructure enhancements, but has not resulted in deep changes for Ukrainian citizens. And in the words of Larry Wolff writing about the 18th century, but they still apply today, Ukraine's ambiguous location within Europe, but not fully European, sort of as an other to a more civilized Western Europe. We sort of see this kind of crop up throughout our Brownbag.
So before we get into our main discussion, I'll just give you a background on the timeline of the Euro. So the bidding started in 2005, and Ukraine was selected as a host country along with Poland in 2007. So they had about 5 years to get the country ready to host an approximate 2 million tourists. The tournament took place this past summer from June 8th to July 1st, 2012. And there were 4 host cities selected: Lviv, Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Kyiv. And in order to even watch the games, Ukraine had to get stadiums ready. So I have just a little image that shows you the stadiums in Donetsk, and also, or excuse me, the stadiums in Ukraine, and also the stadiums in the host cities in Poland. And as you can see, 4 stadiums had to be world-class stadiums in order to house the athletes in the crowd. So Lviv built a complete new stadium. Kiev renovated their stadium. Kharkiv remodeled and renovated 2 of their stadiums, and they also renovated all of their training facilities for the athletes. And Donetsk already had a really very good high-class stadium called Donbass Arena, so they didn't do anything with that, but they did have to remodel all of the training centers located in the city and outside the city. So before you can even watch the game, you have to have the stadiums, but you also have the infrastructure to house the 2 million tourists that are supposed to come and view the Euro matches. So the way we structured the Brownbag, we're going to take you through Ukraine, starting at the border. What did Ukraine have to do to prepare the border guards to get ready? The truth of the matter is that they underwent a long process of professionalization and training, but this was overshadowed. To find information on this was actually quite difficult. And so when you do a preliminary search, you find topics like this. So an aesthetic makeover of the border guards. And this actual story was covered in the Ukrainian English language press, Ukrainian language press, West European press, and also Russian press. And we also had videos on this. So again, the story is the airport hired a makeover team to come and make over the border guards, so it would give an aesthetically pleasing image to tourists coming to Ukraine, and that they could take that back with them home and leave with a good impression. Whether or not these makeovers extended to the male border guards, I think that's, I would speculate no, but the women underwent this, and you can see that the press officer from the international airport, the quote, "We are doing this master class in preparation for the Euro 2012. The experts are not only giving a present to all of our girls before International Women's Day, but they are showing them how to look nice every day. So every traveler who comes to Boryspil Airport will see a beautiful Ukrainian border guard card and they will remember only the best about Ukraine. This is the type of news coverage that we encountered on a daily basis. But is this actually true? Yes, they did get makeovers, but they did a lot more. And it actually, the preparations that they went through shows a degree of cooperation with the EU that was overshadowed by the coverage. So for example, the European Union Border Assistance Mission to Moldova and Ukraine, which was funded by the European Union and also by the UN, developed first a pamphlet that standardized all of the border crossings entering from the Poland-Ukrainian border. So if you've ever been to a Ukrainian border crossing, you know that there is no standardization. Your crossing depends on who is working at which specific border at that specific hour. So they created policies and pamphlets, and they actually created Euro expedited crossings. So if you're going to see the Euro, you can cross painfully. That was what was intended, and for the most part, that worked. This pamphlet was distributed. They had 400,000 of them distributed along the border regions that had helplines if you encountered corruption or if you encountered difficulties that you can call in multiple languages. That was the first thing. The second thing they did is they actually took Ukrainian law enforcement to Austria and Germany and Switzerland to learn about preparations from other people who were invited who had worked for preparations for the World Cups in 2006 and 2008. For a period of 4 years, border guards underwent English language training. They received classes specific to topics that they might encounter, and these included crowd management, smuggling, organized crime, corruption, insecurity of travel documents, how they could assist foreigners. They also set up self-help centers for the English language, and they stocked them with Ukrainian dictionaries and translation software so that the guards could actually speak to the tourists when they were coming. And this extended to the local police as well. Throughout the host cities, police went training. They had help centers that they could also access English language materials. And they went on several training meetings in Odessa to coordinate security and preparations for the Euro. And then once you left the border, you probably encountered the airports, which John will talk about.
So basically all 4 of the host cities either renovated or constructed new terminals at their airports, extended their runways, and in Kiev, just to give a very brief overview, they expanded 3 terminals and built 2 new ones, including the largest terminal in Ukraine of 100,000 square meters, handled up to 6,000 passengers per hour. Lviv, they expanded the runway, they rebuilt their old terminal to some degree, and also a brand new terminal. In Donetsk, they also built a new terminal, renovated, and as well as Kharkiv. And in Lviv's case, they sought to make Lviv an airport hub for all of Western Ukraine for smaller city airports. And in Kharkiv and Donetsk, they included large areas for VIPs and also cargo freights, so that they're sort of thinking long-term with their airport plans. And that's pretty much it for them. Yeah.
I think one of the largest investments in infrastructure was to the railway system in Ukraine, because that's how most Ukrainians travel throughout the country, and since the tourists will have to navigate between 4 cities, they needed trains to facilitate this. So they completely remodeled Kharkiv and Donetsk railway station, and since I was in Donetsk, that's just a picture on the top of what the new train station looks like. It's behind Kiev, it's one of the most modern ones in the country now. It also has a bus station for the citizens, and it also has all new platforms and walkways and ticket centers. So this is a really big improvement from what it was. It was previously remodeled in 1960, I think, which that might be when that building was actually constructed. So it was 50 years in the making. They also bought high-speed trains, which was a really big investment. They spent $250 million US, and that was all from the government budget, to purchase 12 trains. 10 of those came from Hyundai. And they had no private contributions to this, no investors whatsoever. So these trains, in theory, were to be a really good thing for the country, but they also had some problems. The good things about them. First, it can travel, each train can travel about 180 kilometers an hour, which is a significant improvement. So a trip from Donetsk to Kiev won't take 12 to 14 hours, it will take 6 hours. No more overnight service. They could carry about 580 passengers at a time, so moving lots of people very quickly between the host cities. They had first, second, and lower classes, so similar to what the Ukrainians would be used to in their trains now. And they also offered Wi-Fi connection, television, and information on tourist attractions in the cities. Of all the good things, they also had problems, and these are things that they're still working out. Most Ukrainians could not afford a ticket on these new trains. The ticket prices increased 3 times compared to the normal cost. The revenues from all ticket sales on the old trains only totaled about 10% of the cost for the new train. So the ticket increase in the fee is due to the large amount of money that they have to recover from their investment. There were also ticket schemes and corruptions involved. You know, they had the trains ready, and they had they knew what city they would be going to, but they didn't release the schedules until rather late. So people who worked at the train stations had access to them and would buy up all the tickets and then resell them at a higher price. So combating that problem was something that they had to work on. Also, they had to lay new tracks, and so that posed a lot of problems. There were frequent mechanical errors, the trains would break down, there are lots of parody videos of people doing dances and singing songs as they're broke down on the train that you can see. So, and then also another thing that most people don't think about, you know, if you cut out the old service and you don't have overnight services anymore, you're creating a loss of jobs, right? You don't need overnight conductors, you don't need more than one conductor, you don't need that staff. And also, if you think of the babushki who sell their goods at those train stations and supplement their income with that, you're really taking away from the informal economy that's mostly associated with those train stations and points along the way. So a lot of Ukrainians, and if you read blogs or newspapers, they're complaining about that aspect, not so much the cost, but just what they're losing and the side jobs that they do around the stations. And then to roads.
So, if you've ever driven in Ukraine, you'll see many roads like the top left with potholes and cracks, not always the smoothest. And for Euro, we found vastly different figures for how many kilometers of road were repaired or just built anew. From 1,600 kilometers to like 200,000 kilometers, which seems wildly high. Ukraine spent about $2.2 billion on road construction, and basically one of the problems and criticisms of the roads is that they were given the contractors, 2 main contractors, including a financially challenged state-owned firm, basically on a no-bid status. No one else got to bid on these contracts, and the cost of the repairs and construction is estimated at $6 million per kilometer, which is more than it would cost here to build roads. So essentially, the government in awarding these contracts has been alleged that they've committed vast amounts of corruption and fraud.
And then once you've managed to get through the border, go through the terminals, and take the road, you have to have somewhere to stay, right? Where do you house 2 million people in a country where most people rent apartments? So if you do not speak Ukrainian or Russian, you go through a rental agency apartment, it's really high priced. So what they did is they embarked on a campaign to build 130 new hotels. We should state that the definition of a hotel varies greatly, and we haven't been able to find a standard definition. It can range anything from a little house that can house like 5 people to a 5-star hotel. But the Ukrainian government said they built 130 hotels. And this was riddled with a lot of scandal, mainly because Ukrainians aren't used to a lot of tourists. So when they know tourists are coming, unfortunately some hotel managers would raise the prices. So this picture that I have on the right, this is one of the hotels that was built and a bathroom. That would cost, like a week before the euro, the price was $130. On the euro in Donetsk, it was $15.50. So $1,550. So a very big increase in price. And so the foreign press picked up on this. They were really displeased. John found some instances where people would reserve a room in a hotel that had not yet been built, or that they would create a reservation and it would be changed, or they would lock in a price and that price would be raised. So you had lots of coverage, especially in the German press and the British press, about these scandals. Also, something that the German press picked up on was criminal gangs storming hotels in Kiev. You had several hotel takeovers where gangs would come in, beat the employees, take over, and then raise the prices. And the Germans picked up on this because their tourist agencies had already booked a certain rate. And due to these takeovers, the rates would be raised. So you have lots of press stories letting people know that it's essentially you might get ripped off or you could be injured. So this creates a really hostile environment. People don't really want to come. So was this actually true? Well, yes. There were criminal gangs that stormed these 3 hotels in Kiev that we found reports of. But the prices weren't as drastic as the ones reported here. They were actually only 6 to 10 times higher than the normal prices, the government admitted. And the government, because UEFA got very angry and said, you need to fix this or we're going to take it away from you, take the tournament away from you. So the government offered a solution, which was if the price was between 10 and 1,000% higher than a normal room would be during any other time, then the hotels would not be able to take advantage of tax breaks that were offered to them. And so this was a way to sort of minimize that problem. You could also stay in a camping park, which was another solution. And they built these in Donetsk and Kiev. And so the pictures on the left, those are the pictures. The first 2 are of Donetsk, and the one is of the Swedish island that the Swedish government helped the Ukrainian government finance, which all Swedes stayed in. And so these were a good solution. A lot of people stayed in them. One Donetsk had 15,000 people stay in it. Cost between $30 and $40 a night. The only complaints were some of the amenities that were promised were not delivered. And also, particularly in Donetsk's case, the marshrutka drivers, so the bus drivers between the parks, the camping parks and the stadiums and the fan zones, they couldn't speak English. And so people got lost. They didn't know when to, get off of the marshrutka. So people complained that just, again, this infrastructure and problems really prevented them from really enjoying their experience. You could also rent a student dorm, and this was true, and this is an unfortunate aspect of it. They were advertising that students were being forced to vacate their dormitories. So classes in the host cities ended early, and students were forced to leave. Most students really didn't have a place to go. So in Kiev, students had the option to sign a contract saying they could keep their dorm for the period that they were residing in, as long as they agreed to work 8 hours a day at the euro, unpaid. Other students were told that they had to remodel their dorms in preparation for the tourists who would be renting them out. And these dorm rooms went from $30 to $130 a night, depending on where they were located in what city. And unfortunately, that did happen, and we don't really have any statistics on how many tourists stayed in a dorm room. We were trying to find that. We just couldn't find the numbers. They also, the universities got about 20 to 25% profit from the tourist agencies that they had made these arrangements with. So it was something that did benefit the university, but not so much the students. And then the last one, you could stay with the Ukrainian family, and Ukrainian families were really excited about this. And in Kiev, there was a movement to let people stay with you for free to show how hospitable the Ukrainian people can be. So a lot of people did take advantage of that. Oh, okay. So we're going to move on to some of the larger issues that, they reported some of them in Ukraine, or in Poland, but Ukraine got I would say the main, the negative press. So this one is prostitution. So those are some headlines that we got from some of the newspapers. Okay, so they made it look like if you were going to come to Ukraine, you were going to be propositioned by many women on the streets, and there's a good chance you're going to get HIV. And these stories took a similar format. I mean, and it was a pattern that appeared in every one that I would read. First, a news agency would contact a nonprofit organization or a government organization who works with prostitutes or people with registered with HIV. And then these organizations would refer some women for interviews. They would find these women and some provocative pictures. This one's in front of the Donbass Arena in Donetsk. They would have them pose, and the women would say what they were doing in preparation for business, for the Euro. And this included buying new clothes, exercising, you know, getting rid of that tummy, and also learning English, because they want to be able to communicate with the clientele. Then they would say what the women would like to buy. Some people wanted a car, an apartment, other people wanted school supplies for their children. And then it would say, you know, how would they get this? How would they earn a return on their investment? And it was basically, well, we're going to raise the prices, and we're going to charge foreigners a lot for our services. And there were stories that cabbies were in on this, and that they would take foreigners to brothels and prostitutes for a certain cut of the profit. Now, is this true? Did this happen? Well, proving whether this was true was difficult, because according to Ukraine's interior minister, they have about 12,000 prostitutes. Independent observers and academics who study this say, no, it's more like 50,000. So tracking how many prostitutes in the Euro actually engaged in prostitution was difficult. However, several agencies confirmed that they didn't see a rise in the demand for prostitution. And so they think that, you know, one of the leaders of one of these organizations said, you know, quote, men have no interest in anything apart from beer and football during Euro 2012. And so they really did not see, according to these agencies, and I read several articles about them in different parts of the country, that there was not a demand for prostitutes. Now, if you did happen to spend time with a prostitute, it is true that Ukraine does have a very high rate of HIV cases, and that increases the further east you go. So where I lived in Donetsk, you know, to give an example, I had to get an HIV test to register. John did not. You know, so they have more restrictions on people with HIV, and they're more they have more precautions, and they're more concerned with it just because it gets higher as you go east. So most of these stories were focused on Kiev and Donetsk, no, not so much Lviv. Even though Kharkiv's in the east, tended to be Donetsk and Kiev who had all these stories. Then we move to that one.
So this title's from the French Observer, you know, stray dogs sacrificed for Euro 2012. This is one of the more controversial, at least to Western media. Essentially starting in October of 2011, there were reports of mass killings of dogs in all of the host cities as a way to clean them up. You know, at the time starting October, it was estimated that the 4 cities had put to death 9,000 dogs over the previous year. And Ukraine has a large stray dog population. It could be up in the tens of thousands in like, individual cities. You know, in 2011, nearly 3,000 people in Kiev reported being bitten by stray dogs, and 1,900 in Kharkiv. So it's definitely a problem. And essentially, in order to you know, beautify their cities, they would capture and kill dogs by essentially the thousands. If you Google this or look on YouTube or anything, there's all kinds of unpleasant evidence of videos of dog bodies or dogs dying very painful death, because Ukraine, their animal shelters are pretty much have a very high kill rate. They kill almost all. They lack the funding to have animal shelters like we do, and of course they have their own particular cultural context. So there was a large protest movement about this Western animal rights groups such as PETA, very vociferously demanded action, including taking the Euro Cup away from Ukraine. The president of the German Football Association in tabloid Bild, you know, his quote is saying, "Now our national team must fight against the dog killers." So, you know, it's sort of this, Ukrainians are less than civilized for killing dogs, via shooting them, poisoning them, etc. And by mid-November, the government bowed to pressure and sort of called for an end to the killing of dogs. But the Environment Ministry urged mayors to build shelters, but they admitted, though, when they did this, that finding this funding would be difficult. And I couldn't really find much evidence of the construction of, quote, Western-style animal shelters. And these two pictures are from protests in Kiev by Ukrainians for animal rights and, from sometime in the fall. And by April of 2012, instead of an end to the killing of dogs, it was reported that 7,000 dogs a month are being killed in Donetsk, and the ones that aren't killed immediately, die in shelters. And when the tournament started on June 8th, Anonymous actually took down a Euro website, in response for the killing of animals. And so this was sort of, there was a lot of negative press, and it essentially was pretty true. Perhaps another aspect, very negative, would be issues of xenophobia and racism in Ukraine and what awaited Euro 2012 fans. There was definitely a lot of media hype. Another short video to watch. See a while, and this is from the BBC Panorama series. They aired this half-hour-long special called Stadiums of Hate on racism and soccer in Ukraine and Poland. And I'll just show a clip from that, and it sort of give you a flavor.
Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city and hosts of Euro 2012. This is the Metallist Stadium, soon to host Portuguese, Dutch, Danish and German national teams. What went on here had only seen in films about the Second World War. Massed ranks, all doing a Nazi salute. Throughout the first half, I saw men, women, girls and boys, all ages, doing the Hitler salute and shouting Sieg Heil. I've spoken to a few of the fans here, and they've confirmed that they're saying Sieg Heil because Hitler hated Jews and blacks, and that's how they support their team. With Euro 2012 just round the corner, what were the police planning to do about this? How concerned are you about the possibility of racist displays inside the Metallist Stadium?
Regarding Kharkiv and the whole of the Ukraine, up until now, we haven't had any such incidents. There have been none, and I hope that during the Euro 2012 Championship we will not have any. In fact, Ukrainian fans are very friendly.
At the Metallist Stadium, I saw approximately 2,000 people do the Nazi salute to their team.
No, it's not a Nazi salute. It is. They were pointing in the direction of the opponent, the fans. So it looked like they were pointing with the right hand to the fans, kind of attracting attention to themselves. So it's not Nazi.
Perhaps something of...
So, you can see from that clip, the journalist was comparing Ukrainians to sort of having a mindset from the 1940s and, threatening soccer hooligans. And for charges of racism and xenophobia, the Ukrainian government denied it, as you can see, but they did it in such a way like that they appear very foolish. It did not make them look good. And one of the most memorable quotes from this documentary is from a former captain of the English soccer team. When asked if families if families should go to the Euro Cup, his advice was stay at home, watch it on TV, don't even risk it. You could end up coming back in a coffin. So it's sort of, this is one of the most extreme examples. And then one more from the British tabloid The Sun. They went undercover and hung out with this group called the Patriots of Ukraine, who were essentially training people to fight in like hand-to-hand combat or with knives, basically waiting for foreigners to attack them and harm them. And so it's sort of hyped, they're training to fight our fans. And it's sort of this idea that all Ukrainians are these kind of crazy right-wing extremists, and not just the soccer hooligans, because the Patriots of Ukraine group is not really soccer related. And another thing involving this was the violence aspect. And on April 27th, 4 bombs went off in garbage cans in Dnipropetrovsk in eastern Ukraine, which is incidentally also where Yulia Tymoshenko is from. And 26 people were injured, but it's sort of, they arrested 3 people for these bombings, and the most cynical interpretations seem to carry the day that this was probably orchestrated by the Ukrainian government as like an excuse to take attention away from problems in Ukraine and the imprisonment of Tymoshenko, which I'll get to in a second, and sort of as an excuse. That was very commonly reported that this is what people believed, and and there was a lot of, they refer to this as a terrorist incident. The 3 people arrested, one of whom was a lecturer at a local university, and people thought that these people were just kind of stooges arrested just because, and so it sort of provoked this panic that there could be terrorist attacks. And during the Euro itself, there were no real major incidents of violence outside of a couple soccer fans. There's like almost no reported incidents of what we consider like a hate crime as attacking minorities or anything of that nature. And moving on to politics. So one of the other major issues was political controversy in the Euro 2012, and the major microcosmic issue for this is the arrest and imprisonment of former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. In August 2011, she was arrested over a 2009 gas deal that she signed with Russia to essentially pay. It was seen as disadvantageous to Ukraine because they were paying a high price for the gas that they needed to, say, heat their homes. And the current president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, it's seen as his political vendetta to arrest Tymoshenko, to keep her out of the fall 2012 parliamentary elections, and also lock her up for the next upcoming presidential elections in 2015. So there's a lot of protests within Ukraine as sort of an issue of selective justice and deficit of democracy. And it's sort of heated up in April of 2012, where Yulia went on a hunger strike. There were calls for EU politicians to boycott the Euro. There was an annual summit of Central European leaders, and in this May of 2012, it was supposed to be in Yalta, and it was boycotted by 13 of the 20 leaders. They canceled it, and it was ostensibly for Tymoshenko's continued imprisonment. And the Ukrainian government, said we're not doing anything wrong. This is like going back to the Cold War. Also, very importantly for EU, Ukraine relations, they have a comprehensive free trade agreement and an EU association agreement that are completed. They're initial, but they're unsigned because of the Tymoshenko issue and other issues of democratic governance.
Okay, so how do we assess how the euro impacted Ukraine? Well, first, we wanted to get a total expenditure number, and official government reports say that it cost $9.8 billion to host the Euro matches in Ukraine. 7.4 of that came from the state budget. The other was private investment. However, this number, we're not sure if that's accurate because outside independent sources are reporting that it could range anywhere from 12 to 14 billion US dollars. The discrepancy between the numbers is the amount of kickbacks that the government officials and contracting companies received. And basically how that worked, they had people give testimony saying that, a contractor would give a price to an official. They had a previous agreement. Once the contractor received the money, they'd pay back the official. So there is going to be the Ukrainian government promised to do an audit of all euro expenditures, so we can await that. I don't know if that will happen, but they did promise that they would do that. Also, this is the breakdown by city. Of course, Kiev being the capital, and it hosted the final game of the Euro, received most of the allocation of the money. And that's working from that 9 billion figure that the government released. Infrastructure, again, you can see how much each city spent on the development of hotels, buses, and trolley buses. For Kiev, you can see that most of it went with just providing a means of transport. We didn't put the roads down on this graph because the numbers varied from 1,600 kilometers to 200,000 kilometers. It was really hard, but Kiev was the one number that we could not pinpoint an exact one for. But you can see just the amount of infrastructure that they did have to create. So, how many people actually could partake and use of what Ukraine created? Surprisingly, and we didn't expect this because like we said, we lived there and we heard a lot of this negative criticism throughout the year. The tournament with Ukraine and Poland was the highest attended tournament from 1996. And Ukraine received 1.8 million visitors. 700,000 of those visitors actually went to games in the stadiums. The other remaining visitors watched them in fan zones that each host city created with large televisions and restaurants and bars and activities like that. Ukraine, as an economic investment, the Ukrainian government estimated that each of these tourists spent $400 US. So if you multiply that, that means the total revenue that they gained was 720 million. They spent 9.8 billion. So we're talking about a significant loss of money for the Ukrainian government. So what do they hope to accomplish? And as far as we can tell from our research, we really think it's an investment for the future to get people aware of the country, to give a good image of the country and of the people, and to bolster tourism. So everything that they built, this infrastructure, can be used in the future. That's what the real investment is. And there was a quote by Boris Kolesnikov, who was Deputy Prime Minister in charge of Euro preparations. He gave with a magazine called Correspondent, and he said, regarding the preparations, quote, "Most of all, the preparations gave the possibility to reduce the backwardness of the country." So this is what they were trying to do through the image campaigns and through the modernization. As far as the political situation, unfortunately, as John said, not much has changed. They're still facing problems with a possible murder trial for Tymoshenko, extending her 7-year sentence. So in that respect, not much has changed. But for infrastructure, again, we have all these new things. Whether or not Ukraine can use these efficiently is the question. The stadiums, you look at those. Those are usually only used for large events or concerts. The Prime Minister was talking about how, oh, well, we brought Madonna in. How many Ukrainians can afford to purchase, $200 Madonna tickets? Whether or not everyday citizens can take advantage of the hotels and the stadiums is something that has yet to be seen, but they're just not looking very optimistic. They have to find other ways to use these facilities. The airports are not operating at full capacity, and Aerosfit, which is a carrier for Ukraine, actually declared bankruptcy, so that's not looking too promising. The hotels aren't being occupied, so specifically in Donetsk, they're getting pressure by the government to build more expo centers because it is a business and industrial hub. So if we can build more expo centers and hold more conferences, we can fill the hotels, which during the Euro were at 98% capacity. And this is coming from the city that most people in the Western media said would be the least visited because it was so far east and because getting there was so difficult, that they had a high occupancy rate. What about the overall reputation? And trying to gauge this was difficult, so I actually located a survey, and it was during the first week of the tournament, and they interviewed 1,000 people, and they got some concrete figures for this. You know, they said that most people thought the experience was very positive. They weren't fearful. They didn't experience racism. They didn't experience crime. Actually, crime statistics from Kiev. Crime went from, during the first week of the tournament, you know, the week before they had 1,900 crimes reported. That went down to 1,500 during the tournament. You know, again, probably from the increased police force. Thefts decreased, burglaries decreased. The crimes against foreigners were not hate crimes. They were stolen passports, pickpocketing, you know, minor crimes. Were foreigners arrested? You know, how did the foreigners behave? Most of them behaved really well. They said only 26 foreigners were arrested. Most of them because they tried to break into the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which was unexpected. So it seemed to fare really well. Now the survey that I mentioned was really interesting because they said, you know, they asked people, it was commissioned by the Institute of World Policy, which is a think tank in Ukraine. And they polled, it was exactly 1,048 fans between the 16 matches, mostly Dutch, British, and German. And they said, they asked them 3 main questions. Were you glad that the Euro was in Ukraine? 84% of them said yes, we were very glad that it was here. 57% of them responded that their overall perception of the country improved, which is what Ukraine wanted. So that's more than half. 76% of them said that they want to come back as a tourist. This is the long-term investment that I think we think Ukraine was banking on. What did they like the most? And they could check off what they liked. 72% said they got to know the people of Ukraine. Again, you saw that in the first video we showed you. People are hospitable. Surprisingly, only 42% said that they got more acquainted with football in the country. So the getting acquainted with the people took precedence over football. In the last position, 14% of the people said that they got to know more of the political situation. So the coverage of the political situation really wasn't on the minds of the tourists at that time. What could Ukraine do to improve its image or to have improved the tournament? And 42% of the, or excuse me, 42% of the people said they just needed more sources in English. They needed more tour guides on English language, and on attractions, and then behind that, improve the roads, reduce the hotel prices because they were allowed to be at 6 to 10% higher than the normal, increase English language among the population, and at 9%, only 9% of those surveyed said that you had to have more tolerance and friendliness towards foreigners. So in the image and the reception of tourists, you know, it went rather well for the Euro. So we think that it was a success in Ukraine's image and future tourism if Ukraine can capitalize on the infrastructure improvements that they made and continue making them. But unfortunately, the political situation was unchanged, and the economic situation at the time was severely damaged just because of the amount of money that they had to put forth through an investment that they didn't really gain at the same time. So that's our presentation. Thank you.